The Clone Wars began, a war that would define the galaxy, one of the most devastating and prolonged wars ever recorded within galactic history, was constructed due to the master manipulation of one man's rise to power. However, in order for this to happen, a group of individuals had to be betrayed. These individuals were such. Count Dooku was a human male that was born on the planet Sereno and grew up to become one of the finest members of the Jedi Order, being risen to a Jedi Master and was responsible for the teaching of Qui-Gon Jinn. However, many of his political and ideological beliefs caused him to have a lot of friction with both the Council and the Jedi Order itself, believing that the Republic system was too weak to continue on going, and this ideology was made even worse after the Naboo crisis, when his own apprentice Qui-Gon Jinn was killed. This left him to eventually leave the Order and try to find his own path. That path, however, was eventually brought to him, as when the time for a war came, Darth Sidious proposed to Count Dooku a plan to initiate the rise of a new order and government by constructing a war that would be able to remove the corruption and the flawed systems of the Republic by initiating a change to power. Dooku accepted this role and became the leader of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, a Sith-controlled puppet state. Basically, the whole purpose of it was to initiate Palpatine's rise to power. However, Dooku would eventually be beaten on board the Invisible Hand, and Palpatine ordered his execution shortly after. Dooku ever since then, hoping to be known as a hero to the New Order, was known as nothing but a washout fish and a known traitor. The other betrayed came on the end of the Jedi. Ahsoka Tano was born and was taken under recruitment in the Jedi Order by Master Plo Koon and grew to be under the mentorship of Anakin Skywalker. She became his apprentice and learned much from him, fighting alongside him in many battles with him and General Kenobi alike. Ahsoka grew in prominence as she was both a promising student as well as a high capable Jedi. Anakin's teaching also helped her understand the principle of the Clone Wars as well as its overall arching purpose to the Jedi. However, eventually, after a crisis happening where the Jedi Temple was bombed, Ahsoka was framed for the incident. And with this came the eventual arrest and was expelled from the Jedi Order. She eventually was proven innocent after nearly being sentenced to death in a Republic court. However, losing faith within the Jedi Order itself, she left and without returning. She would eventually fight with them again during the Siege of Mandalore. However, after Order 66, she once again had to be put into hiding and awaited the right time to reveal herself again. She eventually revealed herself again when assisting the rebels, in particular the members of the Phoenix Squadron, and helping them, including the Jedi Kanan Jarrus and Ezra Bridger, fight off the Dark Forces, facing off against the Inquisitors, as well as defending Kanan and Ezra to prevent Force-sensitive children from falling into the hands of the Empire. Ahsoka's actions also led her to become a high important military leader for the Rebel Alliance. She was as well still searching for her master, hoping one day she would be able to find him and reunite with him after Order 66, continuing her search and investigating the sceneries regarding Darth Vader. She eventually learned the horrible truth that Anakin Skywalker was in fact Darth Vader and had fallen to the dark side shortly before the rise of the Empire. She coped with this emotion and decided to one last time help Ezra Bridger and Kanan Jarrus find out the secrets of the Sith. During this, she engaged in one final lightsaber duel against her own master. And during this initial engagement, she managed to buy enough time fighting Vader to allow Kanan and Ezra to escape. However, she was caught within cornered ability and chose to stay behind, promising never to leave her master again, and engaged him in a final lightsaber duel. The rebel crew presumed her dead, however her real and ultimate fate is unknown. Ahsoka's sacrifice, however, was not in vain, as her actions allowed the rebels to understand their enemies as well as the overall cost of war. She reminded them that the Jedi were ones that were betrayed, but they were not impossible to recover. And thanks to this, Ezra and Kanan held that hope. And with it, so did the Rebel Alliance. Hello YouTube! This is Dumber Orange 927 back again with another video for you guys. And here today guys, I am presenting a video I have been wanting to make for a very long time. Count Dooku versus Ahsoka Tano during the events of Rebels. Now, I just want to make one thing perfectly clear, as it's something that I have been regarded about within my last video with General Grievous versus Plo Koon, which is overall my complaints upon the complaints that I haven't been consistent with the canon nor Legends timeline completely. Now, I want to make this part specifically clear. The canon and Legends timeline is the fact that I personally refuse to hold the ideology that some things in canon can't exist with Legends at the same time. I believe in that two timelines exist, the Legends exclusive timeline and the canon timeline, which has actual events that transpire. This is whatever content Disney makes. However, everything else is declared a legend, is it not? And one thing Ahsoka Tano even stated, which has inspired me as a whole, is there's always a bit of truth in Legends. For this reason, I always presume to include Legends content within my Versus videos, even if they aren't in full regard to compared to the canon stories, and that's why I try to keep my overarching amount of Legends content within my Versus to a minimum. Not only that, but my knowledge of Legends has served as somewhat limited, which is why I never chose to do Legends exclusive. Fact is while I know a lot about the timeline, in fact I know pretty much almost any event that's transpired in there, but that being said, however, I don't know much about a lot of the combative people within Legends, and not only that, but I know there's just people that can do it much better than I can. Certain examples being Evan Nova, Jen Sarai, Grey Jedi, Intoni, Retta, like people like those. They are able to construct it within the Legends timeline far better than I can. But I do believe in including it, which is why ultimately, while this video will mostly have canon sources, I will be using Legends to fill in the gaps, especially anything that's cinematic, such as the Force Unleashed game, the 2003 cartoon, anything, or the Old Republic MMOs and video games. Those are pretty much, in my view, canon to me until something else replaces it, because there's no reason why it can't fit in the timeline, especially considering, you know, pretty much they don't conflict with anything and it's just additional content. So with that in mind, I present with you, out of my honor, Ahsoka Tano versus Count Dooku. First, we will compare them by their physical capabilities. Ahsoka Tano stood as a Trogrota female and was very good shape, considering that not only was she around her physical prime, but as well as the fact that she is known to be able to have a high degree of dexterity and agility. As a whole, Ahsoka mainly uses the agility to cover for her lack of strength. She as a whole is very fast, very fluent, and as a whole, very direct. And thanks to this, it's allowed her to be able to outmaneuver most enemies that she comes up against. She was also known to be a highly capable unarmed fighter, being able to use her agility to her advantage to outmaneuver most opponents that were usually less agile than she was. This also allowed her to redirect enemy attacks against them, basically using their own momentum to redirect them in a situation that will put them in a bad area. This in turn allowed her to be able to fight very direct but also very unconventional, which was very useful for her as a whole. Count Dooku was a human 82-year-old human male who was in insanely good shape for a man of his years. He's able to directly go against those who are stronger and faster than him, and are able to fight against people that are far stronger and meet them head on. However, that being said, Dooku is past his prime, and sometimes has a lot of trouble dealing with opponents that can directly hit him without him being able to redirect the strike. In turn, Dooku is very good shape, but he's still an old man. This one is relatively easy to call. Both combatants are in insanely good shape and both demonstrate a fantastic ability in unarmed combat as well as being able to keep up with their opponents within strength and speed. However, in the end, the main advantage comes to the fact that Ahsoka is both more agile and she's still in her prime. While Dooku is highly comfortable, he's still past his prime and he's still very old by comparison, which can put him in a huge disadvantage. Ahsoka Tano gets the edge in physical capabilities. Now we will compare their abilities as martial artists and lightsaber duelists in lightsaber combat. Ahsoka Tano was known to be a very high capable warrior as a lightsaber duelist. She is able to combat those that are both more skillful and also more rounded suited than she is. As well as this, she's able to outmaneuver most enemies. She's a specialist within the fourth form of lightsaber combat known as a Taru. Ahsoka's main strategy within winning a lightsaber duel is the application of evade and counter. She specializes in this by circling her way around the enemy within lightsaber engagements, and then exploiting their own weaknesses against them. As well as this, she has much experience on her side. She's battled out against opponents during the Clone Wars such as Asajj Ventress and General Grievous, as well as during the Galactic Civil War of the events of Star Wars Rebels, managed to fight and defeat both of the Inquisitors of the 5th brother and 7th sister at the same time, has managed to fight off against Darth Maul twice, and has even been able to engage 3 Inquisitors at the same time. Easily, in my view, her most notable feat is her ability for a time to hold off against Darth Vader, a feat that in my view very few have managed to do. However, that being said, she wasn't without shortcomings. Her main one being is that when she's forced to engage enemies in a head-to-head engagement without having the ability of relying on evasion, she was honestly pushed back. This disadvantage is what ultimately led to her final defeat by Darth Vader. Offensively, Ahsoka was very fast and nimble, and she was able to compete with those with the strength by relying solely on evasion as well as relocation. She basically relies upon this by redirecting the engagement where her enemies put themselves in a disadvantage, and with this comes the fact that she can redirect engagements and use the enemy's own tactics against them. This allows her to be able to control much of the fight in most situations, with the only exceptions being against those with huge raw strength or insanely great precision. In turn, Ahsoka Tano was a devastating force, and one that, as a whole, is easily underestimated, but it's a mistake that will be your last. Count Dooku was known during the Jedi Order to be one of the greatest lightsaber duelists within the history of the Jedi Order, and was known to be one of the most skillful duelists ever in galactic history. He specializes within the second form of lightsaber combat known as Makashi, a form that specializes in minimum effort and maxed out precision. He employs this to get the opponents to slip a guard within their defense and for him to exploit it, breaking them down and then finishing them off. Dooku as a whole has decades of experience on his hands, as well as during the time of the Clone Wars after becoming a Sith, managed to fight off against individuals like Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, sparring matches with Grievous, Asajj Ventress, Savage Opress, and notable other ones, and has even survived an engagement with Darth Maul and defeated him, and has even managed to survive an engagement with Yoda, and a feat that very few can employ. Dooku's overall goal in battle was to ensure the enemy would inevitably make a screw-up mistake and rely upon the duration of combat to be on his side. With this, he's managed to go against opponents that are heavily offensive. More often than not, Dooku tries to make sure the engagement is redirected so he can maintain his overall control and distance himself from his opponents. He employs this by keeping his blade elongated and far away from himself. As well as this, manages to keep a tight guard. He has also been known to employ physical strikes and force abilities in his lightsaber sequences. And as well as this, Dooku as a whole specializes within theatricality and deception, relying on the opponent's own shortcomings and using them to exploit his enemy's flaws. Eventually the enemy to him would inevitably make a mistake, and with it he would exploit it and cut them down swiftly. Not fooling around and not toying, but being quick and decisive. However, Dooku's one weakness was that he was not the best handler with opponents with insane raw strength. Even if the opponent was less skillful than him, if they applied enough pressure to Dooku with the raw strength, he begins to fall apart. And what makes matters even worse is that his arrogance can leave him to fall into this trap. Ultimately, Dooku has never been a heavy sword, but he is like a katana, one that is not the strongest within strength, but has great precision. And with this, he's not necessarily the strongest individual. He's not a dragon, but he is a serpent, one that relies on the trickery and the nature of the battle around him and the engagement of the blade to be used to his advantage. And with this, he is not an opponent to underestimate. Dooku is not someone that is going to be an easy fight, as ultimately, with his skill sets, he specializes within the one weakness that most Jedi had, which was they were so caught up within the nature of the battlefield that they came so unprepared for the nature of what would happen when you meet the other with the blade. The honest truth is this is a fairly simple but complex one to call. While Ahsoka Tano has much experience on her side, and her skill sets would definitely allow her to hold well, I simply see more within Dooku. Not only is Dooku more well suited for lightsaber combat, but he's also just more experienced within dealing with Jedi opponents. Because of this, Dooku honestly as a whole wouldn't have anything that he would be unprepared for when against Ahsoka Tano. And with this, Dooku gets the edge as a lightsaber duelist. Now to compare their Force abilities. Ahsoka Tano was known to be a very gifted Force wielder. However, while she specialized more within the nature of lightsaber combat, her knowledge within the Force and her overall spiritual entanglement with the Force increased ever since the Jedi Purge. And with it, she ultimately was able to connect with the Force to use it to assist her within combat. She employed this through physical augmentation and using it to boost her lightsaber skills. She was also known to be able to have a fairly powerful ability within employing the Force within telekinetic strikes, as well as a whole using it to gain distance so she can employ her agility. Ahsoka as a whole with the Force is one that has a lot of power to her, and ultimately she is someone that has grown a lot since her Padawan years. Dooku was renowned by the Jedi Order to be one of the greatest Force wielders at their time, and his knowledge of the overall arching Force only expanded after his turn to the dark side. Dooku's telekinetic strikes were nothing short but astounding, being able to throw multiple objects at individuals, and also using the exploiting of an environment to his advantage. As well as this, Dooku was a master at the degree of Force lightning, the application being used on several occasions when he wants to distance himself or finish his opponents. He is even known to be able to break the telekinetic barriers of opposing Force wielders, and employing it to either disarm them or to telekinetically assault them. Dooku as a whole was a devastating Force wielder who was very creative within his use of it, and with this allowed him to employ a devastating effect on his opponents. Ultimately, this one's another fair one, easy to call. While Ahsoka Tano's applications of the Force are very impressive and very powerful, they're nothing beyond the basics, and with that, puts her in a bit of a disadvantage compared to Dooku's more creative applications of using the Force. With that in mind, Dooku gets the edge as a Force wielder. Equipment. Ahsoka Tano holds a very unique pair of lightsabers, having two lightsabers, one being curved and the other being a standard hilt. With this, Ahsoka has many options in combat. She possesses either a silver or a white kyber crystal as the focusing lens for both weapons. Dooku possesses a curved hilt lightsaber, one that is very articulate in design and one very useful within situations, having a simpler design and a huge emitter matrix. Dooku at the time of a Jedi had a blue kyber crystal as the focusing lens. However, after his fall to the dark side, this crystal was later replaced with a red kyber crystal, which provided him with more cutting power at the expense of maneuverability. Ultimately, this one I've always determined upon, is it better to have overarching quantity or quality? While Ahsoka Tano contains more lightsabers and the curved Dooku's is more simpler, but Ahsoka contains a lot of the advantages and also has a second lightsaber. For that reason, I give Ahsoka Tano the edge in armament, but more of the lines because she has more options for combat, and I do say this edge is definitely more of a minor one. And now the verdict. Both combatants represent a fair share of strengths and weaknesses. Both are high degrees of combat experience as well as overall perfecting their skill set. However, in the end, I believe Dooku would win. The reason why is overall pretty simple. Ahsoka's arching creativeness comes from taking the basics and mastering them to a high degree. Dooku's success came with reinventing his skill sets. And with that in mind, I feel like the problem is there's nothing Ahsoka would throw at Dooku that Dooku wouldn't be prepared for. Even if she managed to get any advantage over him within lightsaber combat, Dooku's force abilities would downright dominate. And with that in mind, Ahsoka, in my view, would fall. How I see this fight playing out would be fairly similar to Dooku's first fight with Obi-Wan Kenobi during the Battle of Geonosis. Ahsoka would manage to hold for a lengthy period of time and would be able to ultimately get some pressure on Dooku, as going against such an agile opponent would put strain within Dooku's capabilities. However, as a whole, Ahsoka would eventually be overwhelmed by either Dooku's superior lightsaber skills or his overpowering nature in the Force, and ultimately she will eventually fall, and Dooku would proceed to execute her. I declare Count Dooku the victor. Now look guys, this is all just my opinion, so feel free to chime in and post in the comments below who you think you would win and why. Also, if you have any suggestions for future Versus videos, post them in the comments below. I've been looking for more ideas to compose for Versus videos, and I want to know what you guys have to say. And if you disagree with me, that's okay. Just state why, and we can have a discussion about it or two. But guys, please keep things civil, and as a whole, I hope you enjoyed this video. And until I see you in the next one, peace, love, and may the Force be with you all. Always. Until then, this is Orange 927, signing out. Peace.